John put the last stitch in the skin and tiredly stepped away from the operating table. Anesthesiologist Andrew's face gradually smoothed out. The patient's chest heaved evenly to the beat of the ventilator. The subclavian catheter was dripping viscous, sticky drops of red blood cell mass from a clear plastic bag. "Tape it up, Ellen," John said, and watched as the nurse carefully and precisely covered the surgical field with a sterile dressing. He knew for sure that everything would be all right now. The bleeding had stopped, the damaged organ had been removed, and this one was definitely coming out. Ruptured spleen, a terrible thing. If in a short time, up to 1 hour, do not stop bleeding. Death occurs in 90% of cases. Not for nothing someone from above, perhaps God himself, made him, breaking his head, rushing to the hospital, squeezing out of the old foreign car all that it was capable of. "Thank you, colleagues," John said quietly, pulling off his rubber gloves. "Thank you, John. Brilliant as always," replied the gray-haired chief of surgery. Without hiding her admiring eyes, Ellen exclaimed, "John, you're a god." John grew up in a small provincial town in an intelligent family of engineers. Inquisitive and active boy, had enough for everything. At school he was an excellent student, engaged in sports sections, swimming, basketball, hockey, attended a modeling club. But most of all he was fascinated by the mysterious, wonderful world of books. He read with abandon, often until late at night, having lost track of time and unable to escape from the cozy literary embrace. Classics formed in him honesty, courage, a keen sense of justice. Contemporaries gave confidence in their strength, helped to understand the intricacies of human relationships. He liked to learn the inner world of people, their feelings and emotions. By graduation from school, John has already decided he will become a healer of human souls, psychiatrist, and went to the big city to study. Having entered medical school without much effort, he immersed himself in the study of medical sciences. From the first course he enrolled in a circle on psychiatry, where he became seriously interested in hypnosis. He met the black-eyed Kate, and a year later they were married. And in his 4th year, unexpectedly for John himself, he discovered a unique talent for surgery. The new hobby captured with a head and forced to radically change his plans for life. He came to this clinic on a referral right after the internship. After several surgeries on which he assisted, the elderly head, carefully looking at the gifted newcomer, suddenly proposed, "Listen, let's do it the other way around." And here, in his 33, he is already a leading surgeon of the city clinic. The most difficult cases now entrusted only to him. Of course, it flattered the ego of the doctor, but also imposed additional responsibility. He could be called from home even on his day off. He could not refuse. Today he had expected to be at home, but a big police officer had a bad bike ride. As a result, John's back at work. He didn't care about the rank and file of the sick. It didn't matter. He was a man between life and death, and it was up to him which way the pendulum swung. But he needed this day off to be with his daughter. Stacy was already 8. A thin, blue-eyed fairy with long wheat braids adored her father and missed him very much. The two of them had been living together for about 5 years. The thing is that Kate's ex-wife couldn't have children. They even tried IVF, but all to no avail. John, more than a year, persuaded his wife to take a child from an orphanage, and finally they decided to adopt. The man remembers well how he looked at the playing children, trying to abstract himself from emotions. His wife wanted a child that looked as much like them as possible. Stacy herself made the choice, silently came up, looked into John's eyes with her lakes, climbed in, and sat on his lap. There was no longer any doubt. Those eyes had settled forever in the man's soul. But his wife could not love the little girl. She remained a stranger's child. Kate nursed, bathed, fed her, but callously, as a kindergarten teacher. The girl's whims annoyed her so much that she had to restrain herself. And when Stacy began to get sick a lot, Kate went completely off the rails. She was always snapping and throwing tantrums. She wasn't used to sleepless nights and sacrifice. Hardly waiting for John from work, his wife was relieved to give him an unwanted adopted daughter and went out to meet with girlfriends. In Daddy's warm, loving arms, the little girl immediately calmed down. In a quiet voice, he told her different poems, fairy tales, or, when nothing else came to mind, just described his working day. The girl listened to everything, opening wide her huge blue eyes. After a while, it turned out that Kate was not running to meet with her friends, but with her husband's former classmate, Jack. He always had a thing for her. After the internship, an influential relative got him a job at a private clinic. Apparently, it seemed more promising to Kate. With Jack, she felt like a carefree young girl again, unencumbered by an annoying child. And home now seemed like hard labor. One day she packed her bags and said goodbye. "I'm sorry, John. I can't go on like this." Kate's betrayal hurt her heart. Bitterness and resentment tormented her soul and kept her awake at night. The same Kate who'd said she loved him, that she was ready to live with him for better or for worse, had turned around and gone to someone else. Stacy had only once wondered where Kate had gone, and her disappearance didn't seem to upset the girl too much. Daddy was and remained her whole world. Her little girl's loving gaze was the best medicine for John. She would crawl into bed with him in the evening, snuggle up to him and fall asleep. The little angel's breath tickled his ear, his little nose humorously whimpered, and a tiny hand with toy fingers rested right over Daddy's heart, protecting him from sorrows and troubles. And so the two of them lived together. It was hard. John was torn between home and work. Occasionally, Louise's kind-hearted grandmother neighbor helped out. Stacy grew up to be a bright, cheerful child. She was a bird girl who filled the house with a relaxed, cheerful chirp. Recently, Stacy had discovered her vocal talents and had been chosen to be a soloist in the school choir. The annual fall concert was coming up, and her daughter had been buzzing her daddy's ears about the first time she would sing alone, without the choir. John vowed not to miss her finest hour. On this important date, he asked the head in advance and sincerely hoped that today's situation will not happen. On the way out of the operating room, surgeon met, rubbing the windowsill, a young nurse. There was a pungent, peculiar odor of disinfectant in the air. "Mary. From this odor not only germs but also surgeons will soon begin to die." The girl laughed and fixed a dark lock of hair from under her cap. Her perpetually sad eyes sparkled merrily. Mary had only recently joined the department. All day long she ran around the ward, diligently washing, cleaning, disinfecting, responding to all the requests of patients and staff, while many others, having done the minimum amount of work, sat somewhere in a secluded place, away from the eyes of superiors. Modest clothes gave away the unenviable financial situation. A 25-year-old pretty nurse kept the female staff in suspense. "She's so pretty. She could have gotten married and stayed at home. Or get a good profession," they joked at leisure. Mary only kept silent and avoided talking about herself. John treated all employees with the same respect, tried to listen, support, and advise. They reciprocated. Friendly and unselfish, he had long been everyone's favorite. Even the silent Mary revealed to him the real reason for her appearance in the hospital. The girl's family had always lived poorly. Her father had died when she was not yet 5 years old. For as long as Mary could remember, her mother, Lara, had always been ill. The woman was tormented by a constant headache. Doctors could not identify the cause. "It's all nerves," they said. The woman's work was also not very good. And when Mary finished school with her mother became quite bad. There was trembling in her hands and severe pain in the joints. The dreaded diagnosis of Parkinson's disease meant that the condition would only get worse. Lara was given disability and Mary felt it was her duty to care for her. She took any part-time job that would allow her to avoid leaving her mother alone for long periods of time. Lara loved her daughter very much and claimed she was able to manage on her own. She wanted Mary to continue her studies and live a normal life as a young girl. But the body and mind slowly gave up. There were memory lapses. Lara forgot where she left things, did not remember if she took medication. Her mother began to cry often and told about her terrible guilt, for which she was punished by a severe illness. Her withered face was furrowed with wrinkles that showed the woman's suffering. Now she insisted that her daughter put her in the palliative, not wanting to continue to be a burden. Mary protested, but one day when she came home from work, she found her lighting candles and arranging them around the apartment. Dementia was taking its toll. The girl gave up, but decided to be there for her. John felt genuinely sorry for the poor girl. After her confession, they became friends and often had heart-to-heart talks. The cell phone rang. The surgeon was summoned by the head doctor of the clinic. The hospital had different things to say about Henry. On the one hand, the hospital was more or less provided with medicines and equipment, and on the other hand, there were persistent rumors about contractual tenders, payment of VIP palaces directly into the pocket of the chief. John was repeatedly hinted that their boss takes remuneration from wealthy patients for the surgeries performed by him. "John, I've got some good people who need elective surgery. You will do it." As always, boorishly put it before the fact, the chief, and added, "And that all the highest quality, of course." The surgeon's consent was not required, so Henry went off to study some documentation, and John left the office. On the appointed day, Stacy got up even earlier than Daddy. Excited, she ran around the apartment, worrying not to forget anything: suit, socks, hair bows. John calmly finished his tea and watched her chaotic movement in a state of complacency. There was still plenty of time before the exit. Everything was going according to plan. "Can you help me tie my bow ties?" The young artist jumped up. Suddenly the phone rang. "John." "Hello, come to the hospital. They're bringing in the heaviest patient, a very large man." The unapologetic tone of the chief left no choice. "Stacy." John always spoke to his daughter like an adult. The girl's lips pouted and a tear glistened in her eye. "Daddy, you promised." His daughter's words made his heart ache. "I really want to go with you, but a man's life depends on me." The daughter looked away disappointed, but it was obvious that she understood everything. "Listen, I will definitely ask someone to come and film your performance on the phone." He pulled her to him and looked into her eyes. "Because you will sing so great, and you are so beautiful." He rubbed his nose against her small nose. Their trademark sign of reconciliation, the daughter could not hold back a smile. Leaping out onto the landing, he rang Louise's doorbell. Not a sound in the apartment. On his way down the stairs, he dialed her cell phone number. "Oh, I'm at the cottage today," complained the neighbor in response to his request. "Okay, something at work we'll think of," thought the surgeon, quickly going to the car. In the corridor of the department, John met Mary and Shone. "Mary, I need you." She looked at him questioningly, expecting some kind of work assignment. "Mary, I ask you very much. I have no way to get to my daughter's school concert. It's very important for her. She's a soloist. Please take a picture of her performance on your phone and give her a bouquet of flowers. I'll give you the money now." The nurse was taken aback by such an unexpected request. "But I don't even know your daughter, John." John reached into his wallet for the money and pulled out a picture of her daughter. "Here, her name is Stacy." "Mary, please. Mary, please, there's really no one else to ask." It was impossible to refuse that pleading look. "Tell me where the school is," she smiled. The school was about 15 minutes away. Mary decided to walk. But first, she stopped at a flower store and picked out a small but pretty bouquet for the girl. Nature had given people another warm October day. Autumn has already managed to paint the trees with all shades of gold and scarlet. On the background of azure blue sky, they looked festively bright. The sun, tired for the summer, generously gave its last gentle rays, glad for the prospect of a little rest and regaining strength. Mary was glad for the opportunity to go for a walk. Work, hospital, home, work. Her life schedule looked like this. A light breeze tried to cheer up the bouquet of delicate eustoma flowers, complemented by small pretty roses and some other flora unknown to the girl. A distinct, intoxicating, noble aroma reached her, mixed with bitter wormwood odor in a bizarre, stupefying cocktail. The assembly hall was already full. Parents languished, waiting for the concert to begin. Rasfufi moms, without a word, were chatting among themselves. A few fathers were setting up equipment for videotaping their talented children. In the air was the measured hum of a beehive. Against the background of this motley crowd stood out a delegation of 4 men sitting near the stage, dressed in formal, dark-colored suits and ties. Probably representatives of the city authorities, thought the girl. There were not enough seats for everyone, and Mary was left standing in the aisle. The girl almost guessed. Opening the concert, the principal introduced one of the men as a school patron and beckoned him to rise. He was a short, stocky, burly brunette with a bored face. His speech was sluggish and short, mostly about how he had helped, was helping, and would continue to help. Everyone clapped just as languidly, and the businessman looked around the room before going down to his seat. Suddenly his gaze stopped on Mary and froze. On his face was reflected immense surprise and fear. But he quickly pulled himself together and hurried to his attendants. During the whole performance, he looked back at the girl a few more times, which confused her completely. Finally, Stacy came out and sang in an unexpectedly pleasant, sonorous voice some cheerful song, gesticulating artistically with her hands. Mary handed her flowers and specified that they were from her father, adding that he loved her very much, and from herself that she had performed admirably. The young singer blushed gratefully and pressed the bouquet to herself. Everything, the mission was completed, and the girl exhaled with relief. You can run to work. But in the lobby, she was blocked the way by one of the thugs from the businessman's entourage. "Love, at last I found you," heard from behind. The voice belonged to the school patron, and he was walking toward her with his arms wide open and a porcelain smile on his face. Mary automatically thrust her palm forward to stop the sudden rush from the stranger. "Rose, darling, how long I've been looking for you," he persisted, trying to get closer. "You have me confused with someone else. My name is Mary." The girl was not on a joke, frightened. "I'm your husband, Mike. Don't you recognize me?" The man made big, surprised eyes. "Look, I'm Mary, and I've never been married." The man continued to glare at her. "I'm sorry, I have to go to work," she said, taking advantage of the pause and trying to slip out of the circle. Mike perked up immediately. "I'll give you a ride, honey." No, I'm not far from here." No. He did not even pay attention to the refusal, let her go ahead, and led her to his car, slightly supporting her under the elbow. The three black-tinted SUVs standing next to each other looked like a gangster's motorcade from a movie of the 90s. My heart grew cold, but logic told another thing. A respected man took her for another. Perhaps on the way he will finally realize it. But it was impossible to dissuade him. All the way he stared at the girl and threw phrases. "Everybody thought that you drowned. How did you escape?" Mary was tired of arguing and was glad when they finally arrived. John was standing on the steps. He had come down to buy coffee from the machine after the operation and was waiting for the nurse. A motorcade of black cars drove up, attracting attention. Mary suddenly jumped out of the car with a tense face and walked briskly toward the entrance. She was followed by a presentably dressed man. "Mary, where are you going? Wait!" he shouted after her. He managed to catch up with her and grabbed her arm. The surgeon did not like this development. He approached and took the man's clinging palm away from the nurse. "What's the matter?" John turned to the pursuer. "I found my dead wife and she's running away from me for some reason," the businessman replied nervously. At John's mute question, she shrugged her shoulders. "John, I don't know who it is, honestly. He has me confused with someone else." The businessman was still trying to cling to Mary, but the surgeon stood between them, deliberately covering the girl with himself. Two huge closets escorting the strange man rushed to the chief's aid. The situation was heating up. "Listen, I understand your wife's name was Rose?" "Yes. This girl's name is Mary. She works for us, and this is the first time she's seen you. Maybe she just looks alike," John said in a quiet, soft voice, nudging the nurse toward the entrance. She was gone in a flash, and the annoyed man was left standing face to face with the doctor. The businessman muttered threateningly and left, leading the bodyguards away. "Strange. He doesn't look crazy," thought the doctor and wrote down the license plate number just in case. But that was just the beginning. The next day, Mary showed up for work pale as death. Her hands were shaking and she couldn't help it. John called her into the empty residence room. "What's wrong again?" he asked in a concerned tone. "I don't know." His voice sounded desperate. "He's keeping up. Now he's following me around the house. He's so persistent I could barely get away. What should I do?" Yesterday, John was suspicious of all this mess, and especially of this businessman. It was strange. He went to the window. Downstairs in the parking lot there were two SUVs similar to yesterday's. Who knows? Maybe it's already a stakeout. "Well, until we get this cleared up, you're staying at my place tonight," he said firmly. "What are you doing?" "John, you don't know me at all, and rumors will spread." The surgeon grinned. "I know enough about you. You're a good, decent man. I don't care about rumors. It's settled. No objections. You can't go home yet." Mary looked at the man gratefully. She wanted to hug her savior in a friendly way, but she restrained her impulse. Who is he and who is she? John entered the room with his patient from yesterday. It was known that he was a police colonel and had recently become the head of the anti-corruption department. He was already pinking up and looking pretty chipper. "Bob, you look great." "Bob, John, it's Bob from now on." "Bob, you brought me back from the dead," exclaimed the policeman. He was only 3 years older than the surgeon, and it was easy for them to relate to each other. "Well then, I'm John." He smiled and extended his hand to shake. "John, I owe you my life." "Thank you," Bob said seriously, writhing in pain, but holding the doctor's hand to emphasize the importance of the moment. "If there is anything I can do to help, I will be only glad." John was silent. He did not like to ask patients for any favors, but this was a special case, and Bob seemed quite adequate. Having listened attentively to his new comrade, the colonel said, "Give me the license plate number. I'll find out everything I can." "Stacy, meet the guests," John shouted from the doorway, letting the hesitant Mary pass in front of him. "Hi, Daddy." The daughter hung around his neck. Then she turned shyly to the girl and immediately exclaimed, "I recognize you. It was you who gave me the flowers. They are in my room." Mary nodded in embarrassment and smiled. A funny little girl. The hosts were so hospitable that the past insecurity and stiffness disappeared in an instant. "Let me cook dinner," she dared to suggest. "Will you help me, Stacy?" "Yes, yes, yes." She jumped up and down. After dinner, Stacy ran off to finish her homework, and the new friends stayed in the kitchen to drink tea. At last they could relax and forget their troubles, at least for a while. The hot cup warmed the palms of their hands, the golden light from the open work wall lamp reflected in the dark window glass. It was cozy and warm. Suddenly, unexpectedly, this serenity was interrupted by the loud sound of breaking glass. The window exploded with 100 shards scattered everywhere. John and Mary didn't even have time to react. Luckily, no one was hit. A weighty piece of brick lay in the middle of the kitchen. A startled Stacy ran in and stopped dead. John shoved her out of the way and rushed over to the confused guest. "I'm all right," she said, struggling to keep her hands from trembling. The man picked up a brick, untied a piece of paper from it, and unfolded it. "What is it?" the girl asked in a hoarse voice. "It's a message. To me," he answered briefly. Mary went over and took the note from his hands. "Let the girl go, or you'll be sorry," it said. A cold wind blew from the hole in the window with a threatening howl, and a few splinters fell belatedly on the windowsill. Mary felt creepy and scared. What did it all mean? What awaited her next? God, why did she have to drag this wonderful man and his little daughter into it? She began to dress frantically. Her trembling fingers could not cope with the laces on her shoes. "Mary, don't make this up." John suddenly switched to you and stood in front of the front door. "Where are you going?" "I can't put you and my daughter in danger," he said. "I can't do that." The transition to informality came naturally to her. "Who knows what that crazy man will do next time? I'm not leaving you alone in this situation, and I was promised help." His voice sounded persuasive. "Take off your shoes and let's go clean up the glass." Mary hesitated a little longer and returned to the kitchen. The next morning the trouble continued. Someone had slashed the tires of John's car. When Mary saw this, she shrank back, but the man calmly took her under his arm and led her to the bus stop. John persisted in his care of the nurse. He could not even imagine how one could abandon a friend in distress. At lunchtime she came over and whispered, "His guard was in the ward today. This was getting out of hand." "What did he want?" "I don't know." The girl shrugged her shoulders, puzzled. "He was talking in the corridor with a man from the 4th ward." "Don't worry, we'll sort it all out soon," the man reassured her. His phone rang. It was the man in charge again. Henry looked like a storm cloud today, except for the lightning bolts in his eyes. In his hands he held a sheet of paper with neat handwriting on both sides. "Have a seat, John," he said in a formal tone that suggested something was wrong. "There's been a complaint about you. The patient says you offered to buy narcotics for pain relief after the operation. That's a move John didn't expect from a crazy businessman." "Complaint?" he asked. "So you admit—" The chief doctor frowned even more. "No, it's not true. I'm being framed." But the chief was not interested in these details and continued. "In addition, yesterday I was approached by a worthy man with a similar statement, but verbally. And you do not think suspicious such a coincidence?" Tried to get through to the logic of the chief physician-surgeon. He didn't even want to hear it. "Well, you're fired, John, and be thankful if you don't go to jail." I reached the department on cotton legs, in his head chaotically running different thoughts. What now? Is his career over? With such a recommendation, he is assured a place in the black list. In the residence room, there was a working atmosphere. 2 ward nurses were clarifying the doctor's appointments for patients. The head of the department was discussing something with the nurse mistress. A bewildered John plopped down on the couch. "Well, colleagues, it's time to say goodbye. I've just been fired." The silence hung for a few seconds and exploded into a million questions and outrages. The fired doctor briefly recounted his conversation with the chief. "We will not let you offend," said the chief firmly. The unexpected news quickly spread throughout the clinic. The head of surgery methodically bypassed the heads of the other departments. Doctors, nurses, and even junior medical staff collected signatures to appeal to the chief. No one believed that a surgeon from God could commit such an abomination. John was finishing packing his things when Henry called. "John, you're staying on for now. Thank your co-workers for that." The chief physician mumbled and hung up. For 2 days there was a lull, and it seemed that the mad widower had finally calmed down. The police colonel was sullen when John stopped by to check on him. "Hello? Hey, listen, my eagle's got some information." Mike, 30 years old, had been a widower for about a year. He'd been married to Rose for about the same amount of time. The circumstances of his wife's death were qualified as an accident, but there were some oddities in the case. The couple were boating on the river. The wife carelessly overboard and fell into the water. No body was found, nor were there any witnesses to the accident. Suspicious, but no evidence against him. No corpse, no crime. Leaving the colonel's room, John thought about it. Some pieces of the puzzle were trying to fit into a picture, but some pieces were still missing. Toward evening, a heavy patient was brought in. A complex multi-hour operation was to be performed. Despite her protests, John put Mary in a cab and sent her to his house. He smiled and added, "I'll be late." We finished the operation at 11 o'clock at night. Fortunately, everything went well. Tired but satisfied with the result, the surgeon washed his face and called a cab. Entering his driveway, John realized that the light bulb had burned out, began to look in his pocket for a phone to illuminate. A sharp pain under his knees from behind caught him off guard. His legs instantly buckled, and he was pummeled with heavy punches. After a strong blow to the face, a bright light flashed in his brain for a moment, and then darkness came again, and with it, oblivion. John opened his right eye with difficulty. The left one wouldn't open for some reason. The outline of the room looked like a hospital room. His body ached all the way down to his fingertips. He tried to move his arms and legs responded to his message. "What's wrong with your eye?" "John, Jesus," someone cried out from nearby. The man turned his head toward the sound. Next to him sat a weeping Mary. "Why are you crying? I'm still alive." He tried to joke, but his voice was traitorously quiet and creaky. The joke had the opposite effect, and the girl sobbed even more. "It's my fault," she cried through her tears. "Stop it." John's voice became louder and more confident. "Why don't you tell me why I can't see?" Mary calmed down a little and wiped away her tears. "You were only beaten, 2 ribs broken, and also hit near the temple. The swelling will go down and the eye will open," she said through sobs. John put his palms to his right eye. His hands are still intact. He grinned. The attackers were never found, but the surgeon didn't even think about it. Such an unexpected, unpleasant vacation had its advantages. There was plenty of time to carefully sort out all the details of the events of the last week. Many things now became clearer. What to do next was also more or less clear. After 10 days, John was already moving around freely and no longer frightened people with his appearance. He couldn't stay in the hospital room any longer. Directly from the hospital, he drove to the place of death, indicated in the protocol. Good for the time of illness, his car was cleaned up and brought to the parking lot. John decided to drive down along the riverbed. In the first few settlements on his way, when asked about the corpse, which had been fished about a year ago, the inhabitants only frowned and baptized. But in one village, they suddenly advised him to go to an old woman who lived near the bank and had never found anything there in her long life. Her dilapidated house was indeed very close to the water. The door was opened by an old grandmother of a genteel appearance. "What do you want, handsome?" she asked good-naturedly. Having listened to the not-quite-usual question, she raised her eyebrows and invited him into the house. "I had a find last year. Come in." John crouched down and entered a small room with a low ceiling. His grandmother sat down at the table and with a smile waved her hand into the depths of the room. There, in the corner near the stove, sat Mary. She looked up at the guest with surprised eyes and asked, "Who is it, grandmother?" "It's for you, my dear," she answered and grinned, noticing the man's rounded eyes. It turned out that on the day Rose had disappeared, the woman had spotted a drowned woman in the water, snagged on a snag. A closer look revealed that the girl was still breathing. The elderly woman dragged her to her house, but she was thin and small. The grandmother managed to get out found, but she, unfortunately, remembered nothing about her former life. She stayed with the old woman and helped her with her chores. The amazed John could not believe in the miracle. He sat closer to the exact copy of his nurse. "What's your name?" "Mary." She answered without hesitation. The man's eyes widened again in surprise. "That's what I called her," the grandmother explained. John continued to ask, "Mary, what do you remember?" She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "I remember only this house and my grandmother." The surgeon looked around the room thoughtfully, completely in line with its mistress. Small, old, but clean and cozy. Freshly whitewashed stove with a bed, bright striped tracks on the floor, a good wooden table by a small window. A metal tea strainer on a long chain on the table caught my eye. "What if you have obvious post-traumatic amnesia?" he explained to the poor girl. "I am a doctor and used to be seriously engaged in hypnosis. In such a state you can try to get your memories back. What do you think?" The grandmother shrugged her shoulders. "Try, doctor. It is not good that a young, beautiful girl is sitting here with me, an old woman for a year." "Give your hypnosis," the girl also agreed. The man turned to the landlady. "I need to be alone with the patient." After closing all the windows and doors tightly, he sat the girl on a chair in the middle of the room. Swinging the shiny object in front of her eyes, he began to speak in a quiet, ingratiating voice as if he were trying to get into her head step by step. "Relax and detach yourself from all sounds. Listen only to my voice. You hear only my voice. At the count of 10, you will fall asleep. After the countdown ends, at the word 1, you will wake up and remember everything you have forgotten. 1, 2, 3. The girl's body went limp and her pupils froze lifelessly in one position. Her breathing became deep and calm. "Remember. Remember who you are. What happened to you. 2, 1. The girl shuddered and woke up. For a few seconds she realized what had happened, and then wrapping her arms around her head and rocking began to say, "I remember everything. Yes, I remember. Mike. It's him." John sat down in front of her and gently took her hands in his. "Tell me, Mary. I'm Rose. I grew up in a well-to-do family. Her parents had a successful cosmetics business. Rose was never denied anything, but she was demanding. She graduated from high school with honors and then got a profession as a cosmetologist. Since childhood, she knew the value of money and knew how to manage them. Noticing the entrepreneurial spirit in her daughter, her parents gave her a beauty salon, and in 2 years they had Rose was already 3, and a year later 9. Quite by chance, as it seemed at the time, the girl met Mike. The young man did not leave her a step, trying to interest and charm her. Very beautifully courted. Everyday flowers, cozy restaurants, walks along the river, and even a flight in a hot air balloon. Life turned into a magical fairy tale. Rose herself did not believe in his happiness. On the proposal to marry, agreed immediately, without thinking. At the wedding, Rose's parents gave the young a large country house and a substantial amount in the bank. But the euphoria passed rather quickly. Mike turned out to be a lazy Alfonso. He either sat at home on the sofa in front of the TV with a cocktail in his hands, or he was going somewhere, as he said, on business in the city. While Rose worked hard and multiplied the family budget, her husband indulged in idle pursuits. The result of his business was a constant withdrawal of money from their joint account. On the questions and claims of his wife, Mike responded with jokes or translated the conversation to other topics. And then a terrible thing happened. Rose's parents, returning home at night by car during a powerful downpour, and got into a fatal accident. Both died on the spot. The girl grieved alone for a long time. Her husband did not support her in any way. It seemed that he was even happy about this circumstance because Rose inherited a huge fortune, stores, wholesale bases, several bank accounts, and much more. The veil fell from the eyes of a young woman. Finally, she realized who warmed on her chest. Seeing the decisive changes in the relationship, Mike tried to return to the state of candy bouquet period. But sweet speeches and fake smile no longer worked on the girl. She was firm and insisted on divorce. Then Mike asked his wife to give him one last chance. If after that they say she will not soften, there will be only divorce. Spouse carefully prepared a surprise. A romantic evening with a boat ride. Rose coldly perceived his pathetic attempts to mend their faded relationship. Probably lately, she'd developed a strong immunity. I just wanted to serve this duty and get rid of the extra weight, pulling her down like an anchor. Completely indifferent to her husband, Rose immersed herself in contemplation of the surrounding beauty. Dense thickets fringed the riverbed, weaving into an unusual natural hedge. Trembling willows stretched their graceful arms following the passing boat. In the clear greenish water, fish glistened with their silvery backs. A sudden sharp pain in the back of my head instantly turned off this picturesque picture. It became cold and wet. Waking up, Rose, through the fog, saw the kind face of an old woman leaning over her. John called Bob and briefly told him the results of his investigation. He wasn't even surprised. What had he seen in his life? The colonel didn't like delays. Come both of you, right now. Bob was waiting with a young lieutenant colonel. This is Dave. He'll take care of your case. Have a seat. Talk to me. The young colonel eyed the disheveled Rose curiously. Her determined, eager gaze and proper speech appealed to him. The locks of brown hair falling over the girl's face, fascinated by the conversation, mesmerized him. By an effort of will, Bob pushed away the silly thoughts that prevented him from getting into the details of the case. The next day, Mike was arrested. The two girls, who looked exactly alike, stared at each other in amazement. Mixed feelings overcame both of them. Rose suddenly laughed, diffusing the tense scene. "Where were you when I was taking my exams?" Mary smiled good-naturedly at the joke. "Maybe you two are distant relatives," suggested John, who had just introduced the girls. Mary suggested that they go to the hospital together to see her mother, and maybe she could give them a clue. Laura was lying in bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. The two girls went in together. "Mom," Mary called out. She looked at the visitors with a cloudy gaze and froze. Her gaze suddenly brightened, and large tears rolled from her faded eyes. She covered her face with her emaciated hands. Her whole body shook. A cry or roar escaped her lips. "Mommy! Mommy! What's wrong?" Mary rushed to her. "My daughters! Rose, you're here. Mary, oh my God, I'm so sorry." Rose was struck by her words. How could it be true? Or was it just a delusion? She felt sorry for the poor sick woman. She bent over her and took her hand. She grabbed her palm with sudden strength and began to kiss it. I'm sorry, my daughter. I was looking for you. A little calmed down, the woman told the stunned girls the sad story of her life. Laura was then still a 20-year-old graduate of an economic technical school, with burning eyes and plans for the future. She had only been working in the accounting department at the factory for 2 months, but she was already in good standing. The chief accountant, a heavy woman of retirement age, Ellen, looked up to the hard-working, responsible girl. She directly offered her her position. "It's hard for me to come here. I'll work another year, and then I'll put you in your place." The girl was happy about this prospect and tried even harder. The appearance of a pretty young accountant at the factory excited the unmarried part of the male staff. Workers began to take more interest in the calculation of wages. In Laura's office began to appear chocolates and small bunches of flowers. The most persistent beau was the mechanic, Peter. He really liked the new girl. But the girl did not single out anyone and remained reserved and unapproachable. Admirers cooled down. Only Peter did not give up hope to conquer her heart. At the factory just carried out a grand modernization. They brought in some complex equipment and specialists to set it up. One of the engineers, Alex, caught Lara's eye at first sight. The tall brunette was young and good-looking. Always in a suit and tie, smelling expensive and pleasant cologne, he differed favorably from the greasy workers with a constant smell of booze. Noticing the undisguised interest of the young girl, the man immediately started an affair. A whole month Lara felt over the moon with happiness. Helene tried to rationalize the girl in love, but it was useless. Lara already drew beautiful pictures of the future together with Alex, but everything ended as quickly as it began. Alex just left for his city without even saying goodbye. The confused girl mentally tried to justify him. Every day she waited that today he would come back, come to her office with a bouquet of roses, get on his knee and make a proposal. But the expectation was in vain, but the consequences of reckless passion became apparent. Lara was pregnant. Attempts to find Alex to please him with the pleasant news took an unexpected turn. The man turned out to be married and did not even want to hear about his fleeting business trip passion. Unhappy Lara was left alone with her problem. It was too late to have an abortion. Her boss turned away, and her parents kicked her out of the house. They could not realize how it happened that their serious, intelligent daughter brought in the hem, afraid of other people's judgment and word of mouth. For Lara came hard times. The news that she is carrying twins first rejoiced, and then led to horror. How would she cope alone with 2 children? She was still essentially a naive child herself. The labor was hard. 2 girls were born. From their screaming and constant worries began to give up nerves. The young mother almost did not sleep. Money is catastrophically lacking. The small, shabby room in the factory dormitory was cold and uncomfortable. The elevator often broke down and she had to carry the children and the stroller up endless stairs several times a day. In moments of extreme despair, Lara had terrible thoughts. Here, it is worth to stand on the windowsill and step down from the 9th floor. Unexpectedly, Peter came to visit. All this time he did not leave the girl out of his sight and was aware of all the news. Her affair with the engineer had hurt his ego. The rejected admirer tried to forget Lara, but very much she fell into his heart. So he decided to come to the negotiations, but now on his own terms. "I need only you," he said straightforwardly. 2 strangers' children I cannot pull. If you give one to the orphanage, we'll get married. I swear I'll love the remaining child as my own. The proposal shocked Lara. She couldn't even answer. Then the girls got very sick, as if they felt something. They had a high fever. There was nothing to buy everything necessary for treatment at the pharmacy. The young mother ran between them with vinegar compresses and other folk remedies. Sleepless nights finally exhausted. Helpless Lara suddenly realized that because of such a negligent mother, 2 little babies could die. It is better to raise one, while the other will be taken under the care of the state. You can get on your feet and then take the girl from the orphanage. The woman calmed herself, making a difficult decision. Several times Lara came to the doors of the orphanage, and several times went back without making an agonizing choice. How to choose one of the blood babies? What criteria? They were both equally dear. So she tossed and turned until her strength finally left her, and now she was sick. Her head was splitting with pain, fever, and cough. The exhausted woman sat near the children. By coincidence, little Mary grasped her mother's finger with her toy palm and did not let go for a long time. Lara gave up and made a decision. That's how Rose ended up in the orphanage. Peter kept his promise. But family happiness did not happen. Lara could not love him. She diligently created a home coziness, uncomplainingly performed marital duty, but all this only out of gratitude. Her husband felt it all. Sometimes she timidly started a conversation about the abandoned girl, but the man did not even want to hear about it. The realization that love from the desired woman he never achieved made him mad. Strong alcohol dulled bitter thoughts of Pasha, but only for a while, so he had to pour more and more often in a vain attempt to drown them finally. So they lived for several years. And one frosty evening, having taken a double dose, Peter simply did not get home, fell down, and froze. After grieving for a while, the widow decided to look for her second daughter, but it was too late. It turned out that she was adopted, and it was simply impossible to get information about the new family. She was only told that the little girl was taken by a rich, very decent couple. Her heart was torn to pieces. Looking at Mary growing up, she couldn't stop thinking about Rose, living in hope of seeing her. The mother was silent, told everything in one breath, all that had accumulated over the years, that tormented and tormented, slowly killing the soul and body. The girls, amazed by the incredible confession, sat at her bedside and tried to realize what they had heard. "I'm sorry," the woman whispered again. Her strength left her along with the heavy weight of her soul. Practical Rose was the first to realize. Did she have the right to judge this guilt-ridden woman? After all, she hadn't thrown her in the trash or knocked her on the head like her ex-husband. She's already punished herself 100 times over the years. "Mommy, I'm not offended. Thank you for giving me life." The tears flowed with renewed vigor and rolled down her wrinkled face. "Mommy, we love you," Mary said. The girls hugged and kissed her forehead and cheeks. For the first time in recent memory, a smile of quiet joy lit up her face, wet with tears and kisses. The daughters stayed a little longer with their mother and left her to rest from such tumultuous excitement, promising to come back tomorrow. As they left the room, they hugged each other and immediately smiled at this common impulse. In the morning, the sisters were informed of their mother's death. Mary unloaded a huge basket of bright red roses from Rose's car. The sister jumped up to help. The unfriendly November morning frowned low clouds and pierced with a cold, gusty breath. A few minutes along the narrow paths, and they were at the right grave. A mound of clay earth, a large carved cross, and a couple of wreaths. It was all that was left of Mom. 9 days old today. They found a place for fresh flowers and sat down on a bench nearby. Rose thought how hard it must have been to carry a heavy burden of guilt all her life. To curse every day one single decision made more than 20 years ago in a state of total despair. And then with silent resignation to accept physical suffering from an incurable disease as a punishment and slowly die. A real hell on earth. "That's the end of it," she said sadly. Mary sobbed loudly and remembered how tender and affectionate her mother had always been, always took an active interest in her affairs, forgave her for everything and never scolded her. Only now the girl realized that she alone received all the love intended for both daughters. They were silent some more. Each thought about her own. As they left, they came to touch the cross. "We will visit you often, Mommy. Rest." A gust of wind came and the scarlet rosebuds sadly swayed in farewell. John parked his car in the parking lot near the City Health Department building. On the second floor in the reception area, they were already waiting for him. The reason for such a sudden summons to the high command, and even at the end of the work week, was very disturbing. Could it be that the last setup with the sale of drugs had been continued, and now he would definitely be fired or even worse? The police colonel, and now just a friend, Bob, insisted that it was too early to panic, that he should go and listen to what they said and then worry. The chief, surprisingly, was friendly, even came out to shake hands. "John, there's going to be some personnel changes at your facility. Henry has failed to live up to his reputation and is under criminal investigation. There is an opinion to offer the post of chief physician to you, thanks to the characteristics and recommendations of your colleagues." This development stunned and puzzled the young surgeon. "Will I be able to continue operating?" He asked himself the main question. "It's at your discretion. If you can establish the process without abandoning the practice, please." He grinned approvingly. John could hardly restrain himself not to drive too fast. The excitement of the prospect of putting things in order in his native clinic forced to squeeze the gas pedal. He wanted to see his loved ones sooner to share his joy. The gray, monotonous high-rises were left behind, and the nearest suburb was filled with colorful roofs of private houses. They spent their weekends at Rose's house. From the doorstep, Stacy came screaming at her father, hanging on him as usual. "Daddy's here." Mary came up smiling and hugged them both. In the kitchen, Rose and Bob were threading meat on skewers. "Hi, we've been waiting for you," the hostess shouted to the guest. John walked into the kitchen with his daughter around his neck and, laughing, announced loudly, "Greet the new head doctor of the City Clinic number 6. Everyone applauded joyfully. The colonel laughed loudly and kindly. "You knew," John exclaimed, noticing his reaction. "Of course," he confessed. "We worked your Henry out yesterday. He's got schemes that will take the whole department a year to figure out. Come on, let's go to the gazebo. I've got the first toast ready." John watched the happy bustle with pleasure. Mary was setting the table, casting affectionate glances at her husband-to-be, Stacy was running around the grounds and fooling around. Bob and Rose were grilling kebabs together, joking with each other. The smoke of the brazier enveloped the whole company in the exciting aroma of the upcoming festivities. It was good and calm at heart. It turns out that for happiness it is enough to have all the favorite people just to be near. That was his secret. When he read the name of the head of surgery on the display of the ringing phone, John smiled. Finishing the conversation and hanging up the phone, he said to his friends, "Nothing has changed. A heavy patient arrived. I have to go to operate." Already in the car came the thought, here is one more touch to the overall picture of happiness, a favorite job.